Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Tillman with another Tillman Take. Now, today I'm going to give you guys a short breakdown on the Uvalde shooting that occurred about a month and a half ago, unfortunately, in Uvalde, Texas. I want to be clear with something before we even get into this video. I want you guys to realize that there is nothing that I'm going to be able to say today that is going to make people feel any better. And I say that because no matter what I say today, unfortunately, the lives that were lost in Uvalde, Texas will not be able to be brought back. And so I wanted you guys to understand that the reason I'm making this video is because there's a lot of questions that people have. People are wondering whether or not law enforcement officers should be held accountable, why they're not being held accountable. And so today, all I want to do is just give you guys clarity from everything that I've seen. I've watched the debrief, the huge debrief that they had. I've watched many videos. I've talked to experts that are former military people, all the way up to Green Berets that have been in battle and combat. And then I've also talked to people that are civilians that have no training at all. And I've done all that simply because I want to be able to convey the best possible way what might have happened during the situation, what could have been done better, what was done wrong. And obviously a lot of this is also coupled with my training and experience. And so I want to give you guys that foundation before we even get into it. The other thing too, obviously, this is hard to watch. What we're going to do is we're going to watch the video. It's hard to watch. And then the last thing is that when this situation first happened, a lot of people hit me up and said, how come you're not saying anything? How come you're saying wait on the details, wait on the facts? And that's because I've said it and I'll say it before, is anytime a situation happens that's critical incident, it's a responsibility that we should wait for all the facts to come out, so that way we make the best judgment call. And we see what happens when we don't wait for situations to evolve or information to be divulged, and then we say something and then we go back and we say, oh, that was wrong, I should have never said that. And so that's why I typically like to wait, and I face criticism for that, but I'm glad I waited. And with that being said, I think I've waited long enough to where I should have an opinion about the Uvalde, and I do have an opinion about it. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, there's a lot going on, and obviously that's the scene. That's the very end of it. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually watch the whole video. That was just the end. That was actually the end of the video. So let's just go ahead and get right into this video. We're going to watch it from start to finish. It's about 3 minutes long. The whole surveillance is a lot longer than this. Obviously, this has been broken up to fit this video. I think the whole video is a little bit over an hour or so. That we actually see surveillance of what happened. So let's go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll talk about it. So this is surveillance footage of when the suspect crashes his vehicle into the parking lot at the school, and then he also goes, once he's on campus, he goes and starts to breach the doorway. As he's doing it, as he walks up, he actually fires his gun multiple times at windows, and then a teacher calls the police. Now, there's a whole timeline to this. I encourage you guys to go watch the debrief so you guys can get the timeline. So somebody actually captured footage of him, and this is what's one of the most terrifying parts. 11:33, the gunman walks in. And I'll pause it right there, but you can see he comes in, has the rifle in his hand, and he's getting ready to walk down the hallway. So I pause it right there, and the reason I pause it right there, That was at 11:33, where the first, well, actually, I don't want to say the first rounds of fire. The first rounds that were fired were actually outside, but this was the first rounds that were fired inside the school campus. There was more than 100 rounds that were fired from that rifle. This is important to understand because, sadly and tragically, I think that a majority of those kids and teachers, whoever else, were probably killed during this first initial barrage of fire. I think that's when everybody was killed. I mean, you fire a rifle at over 100 times, and I've seen the carnage that a rifle round does to people. It is more than likely that most people probably died within the first few seconds or first few minutes of this guy walking onto the campus. Now I say that to say this, that doesn't excuse or make any excuses for the police department or anybody else, but that's just, I want you guys to keep that in mind, that with a rifle like that, I mean, a person can go and do damage. Any gun, I mean, a gun in general, a person can go and do damage if they know what they're doing. And so let's keep that in mind. And I also want to highlight, if we're going to hold people accountable, and I think the officers and everybody involved in this situation, there is a level of accountability that everybody has to answer up to, from the chief all the way down to the lowest level person involved. Everybody should be held accountable for whatever their actions were. But if on that accountability note, we equally have to address the fact that this suspect was able to walk onto the campus very easily and get access to the inner part of the school without any type of resistance. Now, as a former school resource officer, it was my job to keep my campus safe, and by doing so, what I had to do was I did an evaluation with the principal, the assistant principals, the risk manager, and we walked around and said, okay, what are our areas of access? What's our ingress? What's our egress points? Is there any resistance that would stop somebody from getting on campus? How do the doors lock? How do they unlock? Is there a numbering system on buildings? These were things that were done ahead of time, very proactively, because we want to prevent things like this. And so I don't know what the school plan was prior to this incident, if there even was a plan. But if we're talking about accountability, especially when we're talking about law enforcement, we equally have to hold the people accountable that failed to create a plan for the school. And that may be the school district. That may be the school itself. I think there's a lot of people that the onus falls on when we're talking about this. And the reason that's so important is because, remember, I said a majority of the kids and teachers that were killed were probably killed within the first few minutes before law enforcement even arrived. So keep that in mind as we watch the rest of this video. Let's continue it. So you'll see 3 minutes later, the guy is still shooting, and these first three officers show up on scene, and they actually do the right thing. Now, as police officer, I've trained active shooter multiple times. I've been in critical incidents. Their initial response was okay. They were going towards the gunfire. That's what we're trained to do. After Columbine, they set new protocols in place that said, hey, look, officers, if there's an active shooter in place, you wait for one other guy, so that way you guys have at least another set of eyes that can look at your targets and things. But your job is to go towards the gunfire. They did that. They started running towards the gunfire. Let's continue and see what happens next. Just keep in mind, this is about 3 or 4 minutes after the initial gunfire. Now, some people might ask, why are they staging? So remember, this was about 3 or 4 minutes after that initial gunfire. Some people might say they're staging. Now, it's important to know, when I watched the debrief for this whole situation, there was belief that this might have been a barricade. Well, what is a barricade? That is important information for you to know. A barricade is a situation where you're dealing with a suspect who is surrounded. We have him contained inside a spot, and we don't believe that they're innocent, or we don't believe that there is an active, like an immediate threat of people losing their lives. Now, obviously, we know there's a threat inside because this guy came in there shooting, but now the tactics and strategies might change into what we call a surrounding call out, where you got the guy surrounded, you got him contained, get your SWAT team on scene, get your negotiators on scene. Let's see if we can call this guy out and make for a peaceful surrender. So that's important to know, because there's a different strategy from a barricade to an active shooter. And so if you watch the debrief, the chief of police who was on scene, he actually put it out that they thought that this was a barricade subject. Now, again, this is not making excuses. This is just basically going on what the facts are and why they may have responded, or why they may not have responded how they should have. So they're not hearing the gunfire at this moment in time, which is why they might have paused for a second. Let's continue to watch the video. All right, pause right there. At that moment in time, there's gunfire again. So at that moment in time, that should tell the officers, and this is based on my training experience, that should tell the officers, we're not dealing with the barricade here. We're dealing with an active shooter, which means we got to go find this guy and stop him ASAP. Let's continue. All right, so they retreat. So question becomes, is it okay for them to retreat? I think initially it's okay to retreat if it's a part of your tactic and strategy to say, hey, look, we got to find some cover and concealment because he's actively shooting at us. But that does not mean that you don't re-engage. And I think that's where a lot of the controversy comes. That's where I think law enforcement made the mistake in this situation, is they did not go and re-engage that threat. They should have went back and re-engaged once they realized that this was not a barricade subject, that this was a confirmed active shooter, and now we have to go and re-engage this target, find out where he's at, and stop him. So the question becomes, do they train that way? Did they train that way during the active shooters? Who knows? I think there was a lot of failures in this from multiple levels, not just law enforcement, but like I said before, school districts, risk management, you name it. I think there's a lot of failures. I think there was poor leadership. And I think there was poor leadership simply because at some point in time, somebody has to take charge. Now, it's always been in me since I was younger that my dad said, hey, Ryan, you need to be a leader. Even if you're not the guy that's necessarily, quote unquote, in charge, if you find a place to take a leadership role, do it. And so I think that's what kind of we're missing here is, okay, once we realize that this is an active shooter, who's going to be in charge? What's the strategy? We can't wait in the hallways. Let's continue the video. So now we're 19 minutes later. 36 minutes later. 48 minutes later. And he's still firing rounds. I got to pause it there again. I mean, you're 48 minutes later and they're still firing rounds. Now, I got to say this, and I would be remiss if I didn't say it. If I am the dad of one of those children that are in these classrooms, I'm upset as I watch this video just because if he's still firing, maybe those last few shots could have been my child. And officers are just kind of waiting in the hallway. That would make me upset as a father. And it, again, is no knock on police or anything like that, but it would make me upset just as a human being that maybe somebody could have stopped just that, even that last round that went off. Maybe they could have stopped him. And so the hard thing that we have to realize as law enforcement officers, and this is why I won't call the officers cowards. I will not call them cowards. And the reason I won't call them cowards is because it is a very difficult thing to say what you're going to do when bullets start flying at you. We have to imagine that every single officer here probably has a family. They probably have kids as well. And whether or not it's right, wrong, or indifferent, their lack of response or their response, we have to remember that. And so I've been in some crazy situations, and, you know, I signed up to go towards gunfire, no doubt about it. But at the same thing, as all of us are on the sideline talking about what these officers should have done, we can't sit here and say that we would have done the same thing just because we weren't in their shoes. Now, again, this is not excusing their actions. I think, no doubt about it, that officers could have been better. They should have been better. We've trained for active shooters. I don't know what their level of training is, but we've trained for this. So I'm not saying they shouldn't. I absolutely think they should have gone. I'm telling you now, as a father, I would be angry knowing that maybe the officers could have prevented that last round if that was my student. Who knows? I'm telling you now that I know that the officers could have been better. But I won't go out on a limb and call them cowards because I have physically never been put in a position where a bullet is coming back at me. I've never physically been in a situation where I have to make a decision of whether it's going to be my life or somebody else's life. And I guarantee you, had the officers done what a lot of us would have wanted them to do, officers' lives would have been lost. And if I know that, I would assume that these officers also knew that if I run down this hallway, I'm probably not coming back. And so there's so many different layers to this situation, which makes it hard and sad to watch. Nobody wins in this situation. And I think there's a lot of arguing going back and forth on the left, on the right, gun control. We need less guns. We need more guns. Nobody wins. So what is the alternative? The alternative is saying, okay, what can we do to prevent this? So that way these children's lives, the teachers that lost their lives, their deaths won't be in vain. And how can we learn from this situation so that way we can prevent another situation in the future? So as opposed to being so divided, I think right now is a time where we need to figure out a way to come and unite with one another. Now, some of you guys are going to get mad and say, well, that's your little pep talk is not going to bring these kids back. It's not going to bring these teachers back. You're absolutely right. But as opposed to dwelling on this nightmarish event, this massacre event, I choose to be positive and say, you know what, how can we go and prevent this from happening again? Now, the last thing I'll say before I finish the video is that you have to remember that these officers, we're going to watch here in a second, they end up stopping this guy and they end up they have to walk in these classrooms, and keep in mind, they're stepping over children. They're stepping over the carnage that this suspect created. Why is that important? Is because that right there just shows you how much many other elements are involved in this. Nobody wins. Remember I said that nobody wins. So while we're sitting here, we want to call them cowards and stuff. These guys, these men and women, if there was any women on scene, they're still dealing with this from a mentally and emotional state of mind. You know, they might be already feeling like, man, I could have done more. I should have done more. They're probably beating themselves up. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be angry. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be trying to tell people that they need to be held accountable. But what I'm saying is there's so many different layers. There's so many different layers. And I still don't believe that the officer stood there and said, hey, I don't want to go in because that ain't my problem. I honestly think they were just ill-equipped, didn't have a plan, and lacked leadership. I honestly think that's what prevented them from going in. And when fight and flight kicks in, because everybody experiences fight and flight, even your Navy SEALs, your Green Berets, your Army Rangers, when fight and flight kicks in and you don't have a plan and you don't know what to do, then that's when your human response comes out, and then you may see something like this where they don't go in there. Let's finish the video. I know people were, concerned this guy's got hand sanitizer and stuff like that. He's grabbing hand sanitizer. I don't know what that is about. I don't know who he is. It looks like he's an admin guy, has a shirt on. I don't even know if he has a gun on or not. He's probably an officer, but, there were people saying they're too worried about hand sanitizer and stuff like that. That's probably not the thing that he should have been worried about at that moment in time. But again, we do weird things. Human beings do weird things when you're under stress. Again, it's not covering for him or anything like that, but just things to consider. All right, guys, and you guys can see the end of that. So here's what it comes down to. As officers, we got to go. I mean, if there is a shooting happening and you know people are actively being killed, as officers, we got to go. We can't just stand by. We can't just wait. We got to go. We got to go. And this time I will say, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I get irritated when people say this is what we signed up to do, because they don't understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of a police officer. They don't understand all the things that we have to do. But as a police officer speaking to my other fellow police officers, in situations like this, we got to go. We got to go. And the way you respond and the way you go at the end of the day is you have to be mentally prepared before this occasion ever even arises. And if you've never walked yourself through this situation before you got there, then maybe we have to rethink whether or not we should go into this profession, knowing that there may be a time where you have to go. And I've walked myself through that situation before where, like, man, what am I going to do when an active shooter arrives? And so I think the failures in this situation come from leadership. I mean, we always have to look at leadership, because we have to ask the questions, did they prepare these officers before this day even arose? I think there was a failure in leadership at the actual time of the call. I think that they could have been better. Somebody should have stepped up and been a leader. I think that, equipment, we need to have equipment on hand. We should be having shields already on it that don't come from miles away. Radios need to be working. All these different things. I think the school district could have been more proactive in making sure their school site was more safe and secure. But again, we can always go around. We can point fingers here. We can point fingers there and all this other stuff. But it's not going to bring the children and the family members back that lost their life on that day. And so we got to keep that in mind. So instead of bickering and complaining, what are things that we can learn from? I think people should be held accountable. But at the same time, just remember, this is not something that I will go out and call these officers cowards for. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Because as much as I make a video today and telling you guys right now, before everybody, hey, look, if I ever in this situation, I can only hope that and pray that I'm going to respond and run towards those bullets. I can only pray that I do that. I want to. My mind right now tells me that I will run towards the bullets. But when the bullets start actually flying, can I actually say that I will run towards the bullets? And I don't think anybody will ever know that question is that answer until you're put in that spot. So again, this is not a video defending officers, defending school staff. This is not a video to persecute these officers and put them on blast. This is a video to give you guys knowledge based on my training experience, based on everything that I've witnessed in the headlines, in the debriefs, and everything like that. So with that being said, guys, this was a sad one. My prayers go out to these families. I could only wish and hope that we will learn from this so that way we can avoid it on the next one. Thanks again, guys, and God bless.
Ryan Tillman, real talk, it's the truth.